We're joined now by Democratic Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota. Senator, thanks so much for joining us tonight. I first would like to get your reaction to the announcement by the local police chief that this appears to have been an accidental shooting. What did you make of the video released of this incident and of the explanation of how this traffic stop led to Daunte Wright's death?
Well, it's another tragic example of a person of color, a black person, engaging with law enforcement and ending up dead. It's a tragic error. It's a fatal error. We have to get to the bottom and take steps so that this doesn't happen again. You know, in my city of Minneapolis, we have about 40% of the community as people of color, yet they are 74% of those that have interactions with the police where there's excessive use of force. Traffic stops like this should not result in somebody's death, and it's tragic.
And as you know, the shooting sparked a night of unrest with police deploying tear gas as they cleared protesters from the streets. A curfew is now in effect for the Twin Cities metro area tonight. What's your message to residents of Minnesota who are furious about this happening again, another shooting death of an unarmed black man by police?
Well, I share everyone's fury and everyone's anger, and I believe so strongly in peaceful demonstrations to make our voices heard so that action can be taken both at the state level and at the federal level, where we have to make changes to policy so that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. Everybody, regardless of who you are, should be safe and feel safe in your home and your neighborhood and your community. And too often that is not the case if you are black or brown or indigenous, a person of color. We also cannot have violence and vandalism that is damaging, sadly, often to those businesses that are often owned by people of color in the community, whether it's in Brooklyn Center, where Daunte Wright was killed, or wherever it is in our community.
And earlier today, you tweeted that Daunte Wright was killed yesterday by law enforcement. We must act for accountability, for equity, to address the deep-rooted racism in our criminal justice system. We've heard you say twice tonight that we have to make sure this doesn't happen again. But we've heard calls for action for the past year, and there's been little progress in Congress on police reform efforts. The White House did say today that it will focus on the passage of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. So what would you say are the realistic prospects of this bill moving forward and getting passed by the Senate?
Well, I'm an original co-sponsor of the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and it sets important limits on excessive use of force and bans dangerous practices by law enforcement, and it also makes it easier to hold law enforcement accountable. And it needs to get passed. I got to tell you, I am so frustrated that we can't even bring this piece of legislation up on the floor of the Senate because of the threats of the filibuster by my colleagues. So the answer that in situations like this, there's always a reason why something like this happens. No, we have the responsibility as policymakers to take action to get the kind of change that we need so that policing is not so dangerous to black and brown people. You know, in Minnesota and in places all over this country, people who are black or brown feel over-policed and underprotected. And we see, again, a tragedy like has unfolded for Daunte Wright and his family. I think about my experience and the tragedy of the death of Philando Castile in Minnesota, another black man who was driving and was stopped in a traffic stop and ended up losing his life. And I'm thinking about Philando's mother, Valerie Castile, and all of the mothers who've lost children because of the systemic inequities in our policing system.
And, you know, they're, of course, in Minneapolis, which is just a few miles away from where this happened, there's been an overhaul, really, already of the police system, and yet this has happened again. I'm not sure if those changes were also in effect there, but do you feel that at the local level there still needs to be more done with regard to policing and not just rely on Congress?
That's right. There are big needs to make change at the local level in cities like Brooklyn Center and Minneapolis. There's also opportunities and leadership needed at the state level, where many of my former colleagues in the state legislature on the Democratic side are working hard to get those changes. You know, one of the things that we could do at the federal level is to support local innovation to make kind of new models for policing. I have a piece of legislation that would help communities like Brooklyn Center advance some of those innovations so that they can, for example, do better de-escalation in situations that are potentially dangerous. For example, look at ways that you have traffic stops involve law enforcement that are unarmed. There are many examples of innovation that are happening at the local level, and I think we could help spur that innovation and those new models, and that's what my bill would do.
And this, of course, is not happening in a vacuum, but as the trial of Derek Chauvin for the death of George Floyd is underway just a few miles away. Any concern for you about the looming verdict in that trial coming as the community is now on edge over this shooting of Daunte Wright?
Well, exactly as you say, in the midst of this new tragedy, my community is reliving the trauma of the murder of George Floyd. I'm hoping that this time it will be different and those that were responsible for his death are held accountable. The Derek Chauvin trial has riveted the community, and it has also reminded us that in the tragic death of George Floyd, we started a movement for change in policing and law enforcement, and we have to carry that forward. We cannot afford the loss of life that we see just too many times, including, again, in my community.
Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota, we thank you so much for your time and talking with us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.